My name is Amber Atwood. I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, my mother stood in front of 60 people at my grandmother's 90th birthday celebration and gave my sister a diamond ring, my brother a gold watch, and me an empty jewelry box. The room filled with laughter. Some people looked away, uncomfortable. My mother smiled as if she had just done something kind and generous. But under the table, my grandmother's hand, 90 years old, slightly shaking, but still steady with purpose, closed round mine, and she placed a folded piece of paper into my palm. 7 words, written in her handwriting. 7 words that broke apart everything my mother had been building for 34 years. Before I tell you what those 7 words said, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy this story. And share your location and local time in the comments. I like knowing where people are when they hear this. Now let me take you back 3 weeks before that party, to the day my mother first smiled at me in a way that made me realize something was wrong. I live in Millbrook, a small town with 1 traffic light, 2 diners, and no need for pretending. I am a landscape architect. I run my own business by myself out of a rented studio apartment, with a drafting table in the kitchen and sell samples stored in the bathroom. I am not wealthy. I am not impressive by my family's standards. But I built my life on my own, and that matters to me. In the Atwood family, everything works around one rule. My mother, Judith, decides who belongs. She chooses the seating arrangement at Thanksgiving. She decides who gets invited on Christmas Eve. She controls the group chat, the family photos, and the version of events everyone believes. If Judith says you belong, then you belong. If she decides you do not, the rest of the family follows her lead. I have been on the outside since I was 2. My sister Paige is 37, recently engaged to Brandon Mercer, a bank brand manager who has a firm handshake and a habit of agreeing with my mother. Paige is the favorite child. She calls Judith every morning. She brings flowers every Sunday. She posts family pictures online with captions like, "Blessed beyond measure." My brother Grant is 31. He carries the family name, and that alone is enough for him. He does not create problems, and he does not step in to stop them either. And then there's me, the one who drives 4 hours round trip every Saturday to visit my grandmother, Dorothy. I cut her grass. I clean her gutters. I repair the fence posts that start to rot every spring. I sit on her porch, drink sweet tea, and listen to her stories about my grandfather, who passed away before I was born. But in my mother's version of the story, I only visit my grandmother because I want her money. That is the story Judith tells, and that is the story everyone believes. Everyone except Dorothy. 12 years ago, when I was 22, I had just finished college and was still naive enough to believe honesty worked in my family. I stopped by my mother's house to drop off a birthday card and noticed a bank statement on the kitchen counter. It showed a joint account under Dorothy Harmon and Judith Atwood. There were 3 withdrawals over 2 months, totaling $15,000. The notes listed kitchen remodel, appliance upgrade, contractor deposit. My grandmother was not remodeling her kitchen. My mother was. I asked a simple question. "Mom, does Grandma know you are taking money from her account?" Judith's face turned pale, then flushed red. She said, "You do not question your mother, Amber. You certainly do not investigate her." I replied, "I am not investigating. I am asking." That was the last honest conversation we ever had. Within a week, I became the problem. Judith told Paige that I was jealous of the family. She told Grant that I was causing trouble. She told our cousins that I was trying to turn Grandma against everyone. The label stayed because labels are easy, and the truth is harder to deal with. At the time, I did not realize it, but my grandmother saw everything. She saw the withdrawals. She saw how the story was being changed. She saw her own daughter begin to isolate the one grandchild who actually showed up, and she took action. That same year, 2013, Dorothy discovered something even more serious than the withdrawals. Judith had quietly added her name to the deed of the Harmon family house as a joint tenant. If Dorothy passed away, the house would skip any will and go directly to Judith. No legal process, no questions. Dorothy contacted a lawyer that September. His name was Thomas Calloway. What she planned with him over the next 12 years was something I would not learn about until much later. 3 months before the party, Judith announced that she was organizing my grandmother's 90th birthday at the Breerwood Country Club. There would be more than 60 guests, a catered dinner, a slideshow, and family speeches. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice unusually pleasant in a way she uses when she wants something. "Ember, I need you to handle the caterer, slideshow, flowers, and DJ. Paige and I will take care of the speeches and seating." I asked, "Am I giving a speech?" There was a pause. "It is a family tribute, dear. We need people who are close to Grandma." I let that settle in. The person who drives for hours every Saturday is not considered close enough. The one who shows up consistently is not considered close enough. But the daughter who sees Dorothy only a few times a year will speak. I held back my reaction and called my grandmother instead. "Grandma, did you know Mom is planning a party for you?" She said calmly, "Yes, she told me last week." I asked, "Are you okay with it?" She replied, "Just come to the party, dear. That is all I need from you." There was something in her voice that made me pause. She sounded like someone who already knew how everything would end, even though the story was still unfolding. I might have left it there, but that Friday, I called Paige about the forest. She did not answer, and the call went to voicemail, but it stayed connected long enough for me to hear her speaking to Brandon in the background. "Mom is doing the jewelry moment at the party. It is going to be perfect." Brandon laughed. Paige lowered her voice and said, "She finally gets what she deserves." Nothing. The voicemail ended. I saved it, and I knew exactly why I did. 2 weeks before the party, I picked up Dorothy for what she called an appointment. She did not explain where we were going. I assumed it was a doctor visit, her usual Tuesday routine. But instead of turning left on Route 9, she told me to turn right. We arrived at First National Bank on Main Street. She said, "I need to take care of something." I parked the car, and she walked inside with steady steps, using her cane only for balance. I waited in the lobby, flipping through a magazine about houses I could never afford. She went into a private office with a bank officer for about 15 minutes. When she came out, she placed something small and cold into my hand. It was a key made of brass, flat, the kind used for a safety deposit box. She said, "Keep this in your purse, just in case." I asked, "In case of what?" She looked directly at me, focused and sharp, the way she looks when she is thinking several steps ahead in a game. "In case you ever need to open what belongs to you." I did not ask more questions. My grandmother speaks when she is ready, and I have learned to respect that. On the drive home, she acted like herself. She pointed out the Henderson family's new mailbox. She asked if I had any good work projects coming up. She softly sang along to Patsy Cline on the radio, but at one moment, she became quiet and said, "You remind me of your grandfather. He never cared about expensive things either." I held her hand at a stoplight and thought she was simply feeling emotional. She was not. Months later, she would tell me, "I could not give you that key earlier. If your mother had found it, she would have tried to undo everything." I needed to wait for the right time. That moment was only 2 weeks away. During the following week, I kept thinking through everything, not financial thoughts, but emotional ones. If I sat at that party and my mother handed me nothing in front of 60 people, what would I actually lose? It was not about money. I did not care about the jewelry. I never wore rings, and my ears are not pierced. It was about the message being shared publicly. The story Judith had been creating for 12 years would reach its final moment in front of my grandmother's friends, our extended family, Brandon's parents, members of the church, neighbors, everyone. The message would be clear. Ember is difficult. Ember does not deserve what others receive. Ember is worth an empty box. And if I sat there quietly and smiled, I would be agreeing with it. I would be confirming that my mother's version of the truth was correct. There was another issue as well. Judith had slowly started limiting my time with Dorothy. Mom needs rest. Do not visit this Saturday. She is tired. Maybe reduce your visits. Each request sounded reasonable by itself, but together they created distance. If I allowed the public embarrassment at the party, Judith would gain the social approval she needed to complete her plan. The difficult daughter who received nothing and still kept coming round. Clearly, she must only care about money. So cut her off completely. That was the situation I was facing. Losing my self-respect, losing my grandmother, and losing the only family member who ever made me feel seen. 60 people were about to watch my mother show that I was worth an empty box. And if I stayed silent, every single one of them would believe it. I almost decided not to attend, but Dorothy asked me to come, and I always keep my promises. 4 days before the party, Judith called us to her house for a planning meeting. The dining table was covered with seating charts and menu options. Paige sat with her legs crossed, looking through different font styles for the program. Grant stood near the counter, eating grapes. Judith handed each of us a printed schedule. She said, "After dinner, I will give a short speech. Then we will move to the jewelry presentation." I asked, "Presentation?" She smiled and said, "I am dividing some of Grandma's family heirlooms. The diamond engagement ring will go to Paige because she is starting a family, and it represents commitment. The gold pocket watch will go to Grant. He carries the Atwood name." Then I asked, "And me?" Her smile became wider. "Something special." Paige covered her mouth, not to hide shock, but to hide a smile she could not fully control. I asked, "What is it?" Judith replied, "It is a surprise, sweetheart." I turned to Grant, hoping for some sign, but he was focused on his grapes as if they contained the answer to something important. He was not going to say anything. When Judith stepped out of the room to take a phone call, I began collecting my things. Paige leaned closer to me and said, "You should be grateful Mom is including you at all. Most people in your position would not even receive an invitation." I stopped and looked at her. "My position?" She replied, "You know what I mean?" I answered, "Yes, Paige, I do." That was the first time anyone in my family said it so clearly. Not difficult, not troublemaker, but my position, as if I had a rank assigned to me. There was a clear order, and I was at the bottom, and everyone in that kitchen understood it. Grant placed another grape in his mouth and remained silent. I drove home gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands turned pale. But for the first time in years, my thoughts felt clear. That same evening, I drove to Dorothy's house. She was sitting on the porch, as she always does when the weather is pleasant. Her rocking chair moved slowly. A wool blanket rested across her knees, and a glass of iced tea sat on the railing with condensation forming on the outside. I sat beside her and told her everything. I explained the schedule, the jewelry plan, Paige's comment, and the phrase "something special." Dorothy did not react. She simply said, "I know." I looked at her. "You know." She nodded. "Paige told me last week." She was bragging and did not realize what she was revealing. I asked, "And you are okay with this?" Dorothy set her glass down and said, "Your mother believes she owns things that were never hers." Then she added, "She has been playing with imitation jewelry her entire life and calling it real. She just does not understand it yet." I asked, "Grandma, what does that mean?" She reached for my hand and held it. "If anything happens, anything at all, call Thomas Calloway. He is my attorney. He has everything." I asked, "What do you mean by everything?" She gave my hand a firm squeeze. "Promise me one thing. Whatever your mother does at that party, do not react. Do not cry. Do not argue. Just wait." I asked, "Wait for what?" She replied, "Wait for the truth to reveal itself." I stayed with her until the evening grew dark and the lightning bugs appeared in the yard. She quietly hummed to herself while I tried to steady my breathing. She was not afraid, and she was not angry. She was something else. Something I did not have a word for until later. She was prepared. I promised her I would not react. I promised her I would wait, and 3 days later, sitting in that ballroom with an empty box in my hands and my mother's satisfied smile across the room, I finally understood why that promise mattered so much. The day of the party arrived with a heavy feeling, like a decision had already been made. The Brerewood Country Club was set with white tablecloths, pale centerpieces, and a rented projector displaying 60 years of Dorothy Harmon's life. I had spent 3 days creating that slideshow. I scanned every photo by hand. I matched every transition to Ella Fitzgerald because my grandmother loves her music. There were 63 guests in total. The Harmon family filled to long tables. Aunt Margie wore her reading glasses on a chain. Uncle Phil came in his only formal blazer. Cousins I see once a year filled the rest of the seats. Brandon's parents sat near the front, polished and confident. Church friends gathered near the dessert table. Neighbors from Maple Lane chose seats by the window. Judith arrived last, wearing a black dress and pearl earrings, making an entrance that expected attention. She moved through the room, accepting praise for a party she did not organize. People said, "You planned everything so beautifully." Judith, she placed her hand near her collarbone and said, "Family is everything to me." I stood in the corner, adjusting a flower arrangement that did not need adjustment. No one thanked me. No one noticed me. On a small table near the podium were 3 velvet boxes. 2 were wrapped with ivory ribbon, new and elegant. The third box was older, without ribbon, slightly worn. It looked like it did not belong there, which was exactly the intention. Dorothy entered the room holding Uncle Phil's arm. At 90 years old, her posture was straight, and her eyes moved across the room with careful attention. She wore her sage green dress, the one she saves for meaningful occasions. She found me in the crowd. Our eyes met, and she gave me a small nod. I returned the nod, and the room settled, believing this was simply a birthday celebration. After dinner plates were cleared, Judith took the microphone. She stood in front of the projector, with Dorothy's wedding photo displayed behind her, and began a speech she had clearly practiced. She said, "Tonight is about legacy." She paused for effect. "It is about what our mother taught us, and about passing down what matters to the people who will carry it forward." Some guests nodded. Aunt Margie smiled politely. Judith continued, "Mom asked me to do something special tonight." She looked at Dorothy. "She asked me to distribute some of her most valuable jewelry, pieces that represent our family's history, our values, and our love." I watched Dorothy closely. Her expression did not change. She did not nod or react. She sat completely still, her hands resting on the table, her jaw firm. No one noticed because everyone was focused on Judith. Exactly as Judith intended. She had turned her mother's birthday into her own moment. Legacy is not only about memory, Judith continued. It is about who deserves to carry it forward. She let the word deserves remain in the air. The audience applauded. Brandon's mother leaned toward his father and spoke quietly. Paige touched her eyes with a napkin as if preparing for tears. Grant sat up straight for the first time that evening. I sat at table 6, the far table, with my hands resting in my lap and my heart beat loud in my ears. Inside my purse, under the table, was a brass key I did not fully understand and a promise I was about to be tested on. Judith picked up the first velvet box. My grandmother's eyes stayed fixed on me. "Paige," Judith said, her voice filled with practiced emotion. She opened the box and lifted a ring into the light. It reflected the chandelier, casting small patterns across the tablecloth. "Because you are building a family, because this ring represents commitment, because Grandma would want you to have it." Paige stood up. Tears ran down her face, whether real or practiced. It was hard to tell. She hugged Judith as guests raised their phones to take pictures. Brandon's mother placed her hands over her chest. Applause filled the room. Dorothy did not move. Judith placed the second box in front of Grant. Inside was a gold pocket watch, heavy in its case. "Grant," she said, "because you carry the Atwood name forward, and because legacy needs someone to protect it." Grant smiled, put the watch on, and showed it to the room. More applause followed. Uncle Phil gave him a thumbs up from across the room. 2 boxes had been opened. 1 remained. People began to notice. Heads turned in my direction. Quiet whispers moved from one table to another. The 3rd box was smaller, older, without ribbon, set slightly apart as if even the table rejected it. A woman I did not recognize leaned toward her husband and asked, "What is in the last one?" Judith heard her, exactly as intended. This was planned. The build-up, the pause, the attention. My mother turned to face me. Our eyes met across 4 tables and 34 years of distance. She picked up the final box and walked toward me slowly, every step measured. The room became silent, not calm silence, but the kind that comes before something happens. She stopped in front of me. "And for you, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying that same controlled sweetness she uses when she wants to appear kind while being cruel. "The box it all came in. After all, you always said material things do not matter." I opened the box. It was empty. The velvet inside was worn, showing the shape of where jewelry once rested. The faint outlines remained, but the items were gone, already given to someone else. A few people left, uncertain and uncomfortable. One of Brandon's coworkers let out a low sound of surprise. A woman from the church covered her mouth. Judith stood there, satisfied. Paige looked down at her plate. Grant swallowed and reached for his water. My hand shook, and my throat tightened. Every instinct in me told me to stand up, to speak, to throw the box, and let 34 years of silence break in that room. But under the table, I felt a hand, thin, warm, and steady. My grandmother's fingers placed a folded piece of paper into my palm. I closed my hand around it. I looked at Judith, at the room, at the empty box. Then I said, "Thank you, Mom," to simple words, calm and controlled. Exactly the opposite of what she expected. Judith's smile faltered for a brief moment. She had expected tears, a reaction, a scene. She expected the difficult daughter to prove her point one final time. Instead, she received quiet words and a composed expression. The room slowly released its tension. Someone cleared their throat. A fork scraped against a plate. The DJ, unsure of the timing, started the next song too early. 63 people sat there and watched me receive nothing. But in my closed hand, pressed between my fingers, were 7 words that were about to change everything. I stood up and quietly excused myself. The hallway leading to the restroom was long, carpeted, and carried a strong scent of lilies. I stepped inside, locked the door, leaned back against it, and opened my hand. The paper was small, torn from the corner of a notepad, folded twice. Dorothy's handwriting was in blue ink, steady even after 90 years of life. 7 words. "Everything real is already in your name." Below that, there was a phone number and 1 word written clearly. Calloway. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. "Everything real is already in your name." I pressed the note against my chest and stood there in that locked restroom while the DJ played "Fly Me to the Moon" on the other side of the wall. And my mother accepted praise for a moment she had designed to break me. The safety deposit box at First National. Calloway, the attorney Dorothy had mentioned on the porch. He has everything. I did not fully understand yet, but I could sense the outline of something larger. Something my grandmother had been building quietly and carefully for a very long time. I splashed water on my face, adjusted my dress, folded the note again, and placed it into my wallet behind my driver's license where no one would find it. Then I returned to the ballroom, sat down at table 6, and smiled when a cousin asked if I was all right. "I am fine. It is Grandma's night." 7 words in my grandmother's handwriting. That was all I had. And it was already more than Judith had given me in 34 years. Across the room, Dorothy watched me return. She did not smile or signal anything. She simply looked at me the way someone looks when they already know you will be okay. The rest of the evening felt unusual. I moved through it as if I was present, but not fully grounded. I spoke with my cousin Darlene about her new puppy. I complimented Uncle Phil on his blazer. I ate a slice of lemon cake I had ordered from the bakery on 5th Street. And I waited. Judith kept watching me from across the room. I could feel it clearly, like someone staring directly at you. She was waiting for a reaction, for tears in the parking lot, for an angry call later that night. She had planned the entire evening around my response, and that response never came. She approached me near the dessert table. "You are handling this well, Ember," I replied. "There is nothing to handle, Mom." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I want you to understand this was not personal," I said. "Of course not." She studied my face, searching for any sign of weakness, but found none. Then she walked away, her posture tighter than before. "Aunt Margie found me near the coat room. She is Dorothy's younger sister, 78 years old, direct and honest, with no tolerance for false displays." She spoke quietly. "That was not right, Ember." She paused, then added, "Everyone in that room knows it." I said, "It is fine, Aunt Margie." She shook her head slightly. "It is not fine, and you know that." She squeezed my arm and left. At the end of the night, I returned to Dorothy's table. She was sitting alone, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her glass. Everyone else had moved on to collect their coats. Our eyes met again. She gave me that same small, certain nod. "You did well." I looked at her and thought, "Whatever you have done, I trust you." The drive home was quiet and dark. Route 9 at night is just headlights, silence, and the occasional deer standing still near the road. Dorothy sat beside me with her hands resting in her lap. Neither of us spoke for the first 20 minutes. It was a silence that did not need to be filled. Then she said, without turning her head, "The box was empty, dear." "It always was." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you do, Grandma?" She replied, "I did what I should have done years ago. The day your mother made you cry at that dinner table. I made sure you would never need her again." I felt tears form in my eyes, but I kept driving. The road blurred for a moment, then came back into focus. She continued, "Call Calloway Monday morning. He will explain everything." "And Ember, do not tell your mother yet." I asked, "Why not?" She answered, "Because the truth does not need to be announced. It only needs time." When we arrived, I helped her inside, hung her coat, and guided her to the armchair near the window, the one my grandfather built 40 years ago. I placed the wool blanket over her knees and set her tea within reach. As I turned to leave, she held my wrist. Her grip was stronger than I expected. She said, "You were always my favorite, not because you were perfect, but because you were real." I reached my car before the tears came, not tears of pain, but the kind that come when someone finally says what you have been waiting your entire life to hear. Monday was 48 hours away. I did not sleep either night. I lay awake in the dark with a brass key in my purse and a folded note in my wallet, hearing my grandmother's voice repeat one word in my mind, "Real, real, real." At that point, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, with no idea what Monday would bring. So let me ask you this. Option 1, you call first thing Monday morning. Option 2, you confront your mother and demand answers. Write 1 or 2 in the comments. Both choices make sense. Now let me tell you what I actually did. Monday morning, 8:01 a.m., I already had the phone in my hand. 1 ring, 2 rings. A woman answered, her voice professional and calm. "Calloway and Associates." I said, "This is Ember Atwood. Dorothy Harmon is my grandmother. She told me to call." There was a brief pause. Then she said, "Yes, Ms. Atwood, Mr. Calloway has been expecting your call." Expecting, not asking to check a schedule, not asking to take a message. Expecting, as if a place had already been prepared for me. She asked, "Can you come in at 2 o'clock today?" It was a 4-hour drive, but I said yes. On the way, just past the county line, my phone rang. It was Judith. "Ember, we should talk about the party." Her voice was controlled, careful. "I think you handled it well." She was testing me, trying to see if I would react. I said, "Thank you, Mom." She continued, "I want you to understand it came from a place of love. The box was symbolic." I replied, "I understand." She said, "Good. We should have lunch sometime." I answered, "Sure, we will talk later." I ended the call and continued driving. That was the last normal conversation we ever had. Calloway's office was located above a hardware store on Main Street. on the second floor of a brick building that smelled like old paper and strong coffee. His secretary, Louise, offered me water. I accepted it with both hands because they were slightly shaking. Thomas Calloway came out to greet me. He appeared to be in his mid-60s, with a gray beard and reading glasses resting on his forehead. He shook my hand and held the door open, as if he had been waiting years for this moment. He opened a thick folder on his desk and placed it in front of me. Your grandmother created an irrevocable trust in September 2013, he said. You need to understand what that means. Once it was signed, the assets no longer belong to her. They belong to the trust. Your mother has no legal claim. No one does, except the named beneficiary. I asked, who is that? He replied, you, Ms. Atwood. The room felt unsteady. I carefully placed my water down before I dropped it. He explained everything slowly and clearly. The Harmon family house, including 40 acres in Millbrook County, had been transferred into the trust. Its value was estimated at $1.2 million. Dorothy had removed Judith's name from the property before Judith even realized it. There was also a separate investment account at another bank, built over 12 years with monthly contributions of $300 to $400 from Dorothy's income, growing to approximately $480,000, and the original jewelry collection, including the real engagement ring, the real pocket watch, a brooch, and pearl earrings, all secured in a safety deposit box at First National. The key was already in my purse. The total value was close to $1.9 million. The items your mother gave away at the party were copies, Calloway explained. Your grandmother had them made in 2012. They look real, but they are not. I sat there in silence, not because of the money, but because my grandmother had spent 12 years quietly protecting me, building something that would keep me safe from my mother's control. Calloway said, she wanted you to know that you were never an afterthought. I looked at him and asked, why did she not just tell me? Confront my mother? Calloway leaned back slightly in his chair. She already tried that in 2010. He explained what happened. Dorothy had sat Judith down and spoke to her directly. She told her she did not approve of how Ember was being treated, that the labels were unfair, and that the way money was being used was not acceptable. Judith's response was dismissive. You are getting old, Mom. You do not understand family dynamics anymore. After that conversation, Judith began limiting my visits. Grandma needs rest. Do not come this Saturday. Maybe space out your visits. Dorothy realized something that many people fail to understand. You cannot reason with someone who controls the story. Judith was not going to change. She would respond with retaliation. She would act like the victim. She would isolate Dorothy even more. A direct confrontation would have cost Dorothy the only advantage she had, time. So she chose a different approach. She went to Calloway. She created the trust. She arranged for an independent medical evaluation to confirm her mental clarity. Everything was documented, clear, and unquestionable. She moved her assets slowly and quietly over the years. She had the replica jewelry created, and then she waited, Calloway said. She once told me, I cannot change my daughter, but I can make sure my granddaughter never needs her. I covered my face with my hands. Then I asked the question that had been building inside me since I read that note. Why did she not tell me earlier? I spent 12 years believing I was alone. Calloway nodded. She asked herself the same question. She said that was the one thing she might have done differently. But if you had known, you would have confronted your mother, and Judith would have found a way to destroy everything before it was secure. He paused. She was right, and he was right too. At 22, at 25, even at 30, I would have confronted Judith. I would have exposed everything too early, and Judith would have found a way to undo it. Dorothy protected me by keeping me unaware until the right moment. It came at a cost for both of us, but it worked. Before I left the office, I made something clear. I do not want to use this against them. I did not ask for any of this, and I do not want revenge. Calloway respected that, but he placed his glasses on the desk and looked at me carefully. Ms. Atwood, the truth may come out on its own. Your sister is recently engaged. If she takes the ring to a jeweler to resize it, which she likely will, any experienced jeweler will identify the stone as cubic zirconia within 30 seconds. I had not even considered that. The same applies to the pocket watch. If your brother has it cleaned professionally, they will recognize it immediately. It is gold-plated base metal, worth around $40. I asked, how long do I have? He replied, weeks, possibly less. These situations tend to move quickly once an engagement is involved. He handed me his card. If your mother contacts you, or if a lawyer contacts you, call me first. Do not respond to anything before speaking with me. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time with the engine off. The empty box sat on the passenger seat. I had brought it with me without really knowing why. Maybe because it was the only thing my mother had ever given me that was exactly what it appeared to be, empty, honest, and somehow it had become the most valuable thing I owned because it led me to the truth. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off. My phone remained silent on the seat. No calls, no messages, just the road, the trees, and the heavy realization that my grandmother had spent 12 years making sure I would be secured. It took 2 weeks, not for me to reveal anything, but for the truth to reveal itself. 11 days later, on a Tuesday, Paige walked into Garrison and Daughter's fine jewelry on Elm Street. She wore the ring and carried a smile, ready to have it resized for her engagement. For almost 2 weeks, she had been showing it to Brandon's family, her coworkers, and anyone who would pay attention. The jeweler, a woman named Claire Garrison, a third-generation professional, placed the ring under a loupe, adjusted the light, examined it again, then called over her associate. They spoke quietly for a moment. Then Claire turned to Paige and said, Miss, I want to be honest with you. This is a very well-made reproduction. The center stone is cubic zirconia. Paige laughed in disbelief. That is not possible. It has been in my family for 60 years. Claire replied calmly, I am sorry, but it is not a diamond. The color drained from Paige's face. She called Judith from inside the store. I can imagine the staff stood silently during that call. That same week, as Grant later told me himself, he took the pocket watch to a specialist in the next town for cleaning. The man examined it carefully and said, Sir, this is gold-plated over base metal. I would estimate its value at around $40. Grant asked, Are you certain? The man replied, I have been doing this for 31 years. I am certain to separate discoveries in the same week, to replicas exposed by professionals who had no idea they were uncovering the same truth. I was not present for either moment. I did not plan it. I did not warn anyone. I was at home in my apartment, working on a garden design for a client in Dutchess County, when my phone started ringing. It rang 6 times before I answered. It was Judith. What did you do? No greeting, no introduction, just anger. I said, I did not do anything. She replied, You switched them. Her breathing was uneven. You have been going to that house every week. You took the real ones and replaced them with fakes. I said, Mom, do not call me mom like that. I did not take anything. She snapped, I will call the police. I will have you arrested for theft. I responded calmly, For what? You gave me an empty box. Remember, there was silence. Then tension filled the line. I continued, I did not switch anything. I did not even know they were replicas until you gave them away at the party. She said, That is a lie. I replied, Call Grandma. Ask her directly. Then the call ended. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel satisfied. I felt exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes when someone accuses you of exactly what they have been doing. 2 minutes later, Paige sent a message. Is this true? Did you know? I looked at the message for a long time. I could have explained everything. I could have defended myself. I could have sent the voicemail I had saved where she said, She finally gets what she deserves. Nothing. Instead, I put my phone down. Grant did not call or message. He stayed consistent in his silence. That evening, I sat on the steps outside my apartment with a cup of tea and watched the sunset behind the Dollar General parking lot. Somewhere across town, my mother was beginning to realize that the story she had been telling for 12 years, the one where she was the devoted daughter and I was the greedy one, had a serious flaw, a visible one, a flaw shaped like an empty box. The truth had come out, and I had not said a single word. The next morning, Judith drove to Dorothy's house. I know this because Aunt Margie was there with Uncle Phil. They had come to bring Dorothy food and check on her garden. Judith entered without knocking, as if she owned the place, which she believed she did. She said, "Mother, did you give Ember the real jewelry?" Dorothy was sitting in her rocking chair on the porch. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She said calmly, "I gave away what belonged to me. You distributed what you assumed was yours." Judith said, "Those were family pieces." Dorothy replied, "They were my pieces, Judith. I purchased them 60 years ago. They were never yours to give away." And Margie quietly set down her fork. Judith's voice broke slightly. "You cannot do this to me. After everything I have done for this family," Dorothy responded in a calm, steady tone. "What have you done, Judith? You took $15,000 from my account without permission. You added your name to my house without asking. You spent 12 years calling your daughter greedy, and the only person who has been taking from me is you." Uncle Phil stood and placed a hand on Judith's shoulder. "Judith, sit down." She pulled away. "She is turning everyone against me." Dorothy looked at her with an expression that was not anger, but something deeper and more tired. "No, you did that yourself at my birthday party in front of 60 people." Judith left immediately. The door shut hard behind her, and her car drove away quickly. Aunt Margie sat down heavily and said, "Good Lord, Dorothy." Dorothy lifted her iced tea and took a sip. "She will calm down. She always does." She was mistaken about that, but she was correct about everything else. In a small town, nothing remains hidden for long. Aunt Margie told her sister Linda. Linda told her daughter. Her daughter told others at a church gathering. By the end of the week, all 63 people who attended the party knew 3 things. First, the jewelry Judith presented so proudly was not real. 2. Dorothy had transferred the real jewelry, along with her house and savings, into a trust for me 12 years ago. 3. The empty box the moment my mother thought was her masterpiece was actually the clearest evidence of her cruelty. I didn't make a single phone call. I didn't post anything online. I didn't send the voicemail. The truth moved through Millbrook the way it always does in small towns. Casserole deliveries, church parking lots, and whispered phone calls that begin with, *, "You are not going to believe this." *, the empty box became the story. Every time someone mentioned Judith Atwood, the first thing anyone said was, *, the one who gave her daughter an empty box at her mother's birthday. Judith tried to rewrite the story. Mom's getting confused. She's 90. She doesn't know what she's doing. But everyone at the party had seen Dorothy sharp-eyed, straight-backed, answering questions, quoting Roosevelt. No one believed Judith. 2 of her country club friends stopped returning her calls. The church women smiled politely on Sunday, but didn't save her a seat. Brandon's mother asked Paige-pointed questions about the family she was marrying into. Judith's carefully constructed narrative crumbled, and for the first time, she had to sit with the consequences. No one pushed her. The story did the work all on its own, exactly like Dorothy had said it would. I need to pause here. Option 1. You think Grandma Dorothy should have told me about the trust sooner. Option 2. You think her timing was perfect. I've gone back and forth myself, and I still don't have a clear answer. Drop your pick below. The following Saturday, I drove to Dorothy's. She was on the porch. Same chair, same blanket, same glass of tea, sweating in the heat, but she looked lighter, like a woman who'd been carrying a heavy suitcase for 12 years and finally set it down. "How are you doing, baby?" she asked. "I'm still processing," I said. She patted the chair next to her. "I don't want to use this against them, Grandma." She nodded slowly. Then don't use it for yourself. What does that mean? It means come home, she said, gesturing to the house behind us, peeling porch rails, sagging gutters, garden beds choked with clover. Asterisk, this is yours now, legally. Has been for 12 years. Asterisk, something clicked. My landscape architecture business was growing, but limited by my tiny studio. Clients wanted to see designs in person, to walk through gardens, touch stone samples, and see plantings at scale. 40 acres. You want me to move here? I want you to build something here. Something that's yours. Not your mother's. Not the family's. Yours. I didn't say yes immediately. I went home and sat with it for 3 days, then called my landlord to give notice. 2 weeks later, I was back on Dorothy's porch with a paintbrush and a 5-gallon bucket of Sherwin-Williams paint and asterisk QUIETUDE dot asterisk I repainted the railings, fixed fence posts, and planted peonies along the front walk, the pink ones Dorothy loves. She sat in her chair and smiled the kind of smile you wait 90 years to earn. Of course, Judith hired a lawyer, Warren something, a litigator from the next county, charging $300 an hour. Drove a car to payments from repossession. She wanted to contest the trust, claiming her elderly mother had been manipulated by a scheming granddaughter. Warren reviewed the documentation. Mrs. Atwood, he said 2 weeks later, this trust was established 12 years ago with full documentation of legal capacity. It is irrevocable. There is nothing to contest. Judith tried another lawyer. Same answer. Calloway, on Dorothy's instructions, sent a cease and desist letter, precise, for paragraphs, leaving no room for interpretation. Any further harassment or defamation would be addressed legally. Judith received the letter on a Thursday. Paige texted me, asterisk mom got a letter from grandma's lawyer. She hasn't spoken since. Asterisk, that was the first time I could remember my mother being silent. I didn't call her. I didn't gloat. I didn't send flowers or a carefully worded message about karma. I went outside and painted the other side of the fence. The law had spoken. I didn't need to. A month later, Judith called. Her voice was different, careful, measured, not soft, not apologetic. Asterisk, can we meet? Asterisk, neutral ground. Murphy's Cafe. I agreed. She was already there, in a gray sweater I had never seen, stirring coffee, but not drinking it. I sat, ordered tea, waited. I did what I thought was best for the family. I started. Mom, stop, she said. I'm not here to argue about the past, I said. I'm not here to rehash the party, the jewelry, or the box. I've heard your version my entire life. I don't need it again. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I need you to understand this, she said quietly. I kept my voice level. I am not going to pretend the party didn't happen. I am not going to pretend it wasn't deliberate. You meant to hurt me in front of 60 people. I will not carry the anger. It's too heavy and it is not mine. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with honesty. Real honesty. Not rewriting what happened. For the first time in my life, Judith had no comeback, no spin. She sat in her gray sweater with her cold coffee and said nothing. I left, paid for the drinks, and stepped into the sunlight. A few days later, Paige called. She wasn't apologizing, she was crying. Do you know how embarrassing this is? She said, voice shaking. I showed that ring to Brandon's parents. His mother said, what a beautiful stone. And it's cubic zirconia. Ember, glass, I'm sorry. Did you know before I went to the jeweler? I closed my eyes. I found out the same week you did. And you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? Silence. Her breathing changed. No, we sat in quiet on the phone for 10, maybe 15 seconds. It felt like a season. I need time. Ember. She hung up, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that comes when the story you've lived is revealed to have a different ending. 3 days later, a text, asterisk, I'm not ready to talk, but I'm starting to see things I didn't want to see before. Asterisk, that's not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but it was the first honest thing my sister had said in 12 years. I didn't push. I didn't send the saved voicemail where she laughed about me getting nothing. I deleted it not because she deserved mercy, but because I didn't want to carry it anymore. Some things protect you, some things weigh you down, and it's better to let them go. Grant didn't call. He drove. 3 weeks after the jewelry revelation, his truck pulled into the gravel drive at the Harmon house while I was outside splitting hosters along the front path. He sat in the cab for a full minute, then got out and sat on the porch steps. I pulled off my gardening gloves and joined him. I always knew Mom treated you differently, he said quietly. I know, I replied. I just didn't want to get in the middle of it. And that was the end of it. The truth had done its work.